Hello and welcome to This is a Dream, where it is my dream to talk with dream researchers, lucid dreamers, and all sorts of experts in the field of dream work. My dream is to share the joy, healing, and enthusiasm that I experience from dreaming with others. I always love to hear from listeners, and I enjoy connecting and responding to any questions you have, and especially if you want to share any dreams. Today on the podcast, I'm delighted to welcome David J. Brown, author of 19 books. He is a consciousness researcher, psychonaut, and is known for his work in studying altered states of consciousness, lucid dreaming, psychedelics, and all sorts of areas on the frontiers of human psyche and potential. With a background in neuroscience and psychology, Brown has authored numerous books, including Dreaming Wide Awake, which is the book that I read from him, which really I loved so much, Lucid Dreaming, Shamanic Healing, and Psychedelics. It explores, oh, there it is. It explores the interplay between lucid dreaming and other visionary states, including shamanic trances and psychedelic visionary states. He has conducted interviews with many leading thinkers in consciousness studies, and his work bridges scientific inquiry with spiritual insight. You describe Dreaming Wide Awake as an exploration of the interlap between lucid dreaming, shamanic healing, and psychedelics. I'm curious if you could share what inspired you to connect these three realms.
Well, first of all, let me say it's a pleasure to be here with you, Jason. Thank you for having me on your show. And let's see, what is it that got me to connect those three things? It was first of all something that I had been thinking about for a long time. I mean, it seemed to me that there were all these really obvious connections between psychedelics and lucid dreaming and shamanic healing. And when I asked lucid dream researchers, Stephen LaBerge and dream researcher Stanley Krippner about this, I was really surprised that they didn't seem to think there was much of a connection. They thought there was more differences than there were similarities. And I thought that there were so many, and they both had experience with psychedelics and with lucid dreaming. So I couldn't really understand why they didn't see all the similarities that to me seemed so obvious. I mean, just on a subjective level, when you're having a lucid dream, it feels like like you're mixing physical material reality with the dream level of reality. And it also feels that way when you're having a psychedelic experience. The physical reality becomes more dreamlike, and in a lucid dream, the dream becomes more physical world-like. So that seemed like an obvious connection. And both experiences sort of feel like you're waking up to a truer reality. That you're in the case where you're lucid dreaming, you're remembering that, oh yeah, in this other reality, I'm really a human body, lying in my bed fast asleep in this other dimension. And when you're having a psychedelic experience and a mystical experience, you're, remembering, oh yeah, I'm this multidimensional soul that's immortal on this other plane of existence. And so to me, there seemed, I have like, I think around 18 or 20 in my book where I detail all the similarities. So it seemed to me kind of obvious. And this had been something that had been, I guess, kind of brewing in my mind for years. And then it was one day on a mushroom journey. But one day the power had gone out in my house, and I was, what am I going to do today? So I had a journey on magic mushrooms, and it was during that experience that it was just like downloaded to me. It like all came to me in this sort of like lightning bolt of inspiration, right? Where I just like felt this like this. I have to write this book on the connection between lucid dreaming and psychedelics. I can't believe nobody else has ever done it. It seemed like such an obvious idea, and I guess it was just maybe a little bit taboo for lucid dream researchers to talk about the connection to psychedelics because they have been criminalized and ridiculed and ignored, and for all these years there was just this mainstream media just and lucid dream researchers just didn't want the ridicule, I guess, of being associated with psychedelic drugs. So this lightning bolt of inspiration just came down, and I just sat there for just hours with on an old fashioned notebook with a pen and paper, just writing down as this information came, and I all the chapters for the book, just I just furiously wrote them down. And after a couple of hours I had the whole book outlined and ready to go, and then I just spent the next 2 years filling in all the details.
Wow, that's incredible to hear where so much inspiration can come from one journey and then, like you said, lightning speed of getting the book out and everything. That's incredible. and you've authored 19 books I read, and well, I didn't read all your books, but I've heard that, yeah, 19, and wow. I wonder, I'm just curious about your process with the other books. Was it that lightning inspiration that kind of flowed from you or through you, and in the other books as well, or some of them, I guess, are probably different?
I wouldn't say they all began with a lightning bolt of inspiration, but certainly there is no question, and I've spoken about this many times, that psychedelics played a huge role in inspiring a lot of the insights that I discussed in my book, and a lot of, in fact, my very first book, Brainchild, that I wrote back when I was in my mid-20s. I wrote huge portions of the book while I was tripping on acid. I mean, psychedelics have always played this really important role in in inspiring my creativity and in my creative writing process.
Yeah. So I'm curious if you could go into more detail about the similarities and some of the key points that you mentioned in your book, Dreaming Wide Awake, of the psychedelic experience and the experience of being lucid in a dream. Which, by the way, if the new listeners tuning in, it means that you are aware that you're dreaming while you're dreaming. And a lot of children naturally do this. It's just an area that fascinates me. And I'm curious about, yeah, the similarities between that and psychedelic experience.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like I said, I have around 20 of them in my book, and I'm trying to remember them now. But some of the obvious ones, like I just mentioned, is just purely the subjective feeling. They both feel very similar. Being in a lucid dream feels like you're having a psychedelic experience. Being in a in a and in waking reality and doing a psychedelic feels like you're sometimes in a dream. There's actually brain imaging studies that show that the brain states are actually very similar. The prefrontal cortex is activated during a lucid dream experience when usually it's silent, and it's parts of the brain that normally aren't in communication with one another are in communication. People describe the experience as an awakening experience, like they're understanding its true level, like there's a truer level of reality that they had forgotten or that they were missing. My very first lucid dream experience happened around 3 days after my first psychedelic experience when I was 16 years old and I first tried LSD. I had a lucid dream spontaneously around around 2 or 3 days later. That was my very first experience, and it seemed like there was definitely a connection. And I realized that this was the case for many people, especially with ayahuasca and iboga or ibogaine, that many people have lucid dream experiences either the night of having the psychedelic experience or a few days afterwards. So it seems like having a psychedelic experience sort of awakens something in your brain or in your mind that makes having a lucid dream more possible. So those are some of the connections, and also there's a connection with shamanic healing, in that in the Amazonian tribes down in the indigenous people down in the Amazon, where they use ayahuasca, they also utilize lucid dreaming as part of their shamanic healing ceremonies. And in my own case, I was able to use lucid dreaming to heal myself from traumas that I had during childhood. There's a whole rich area of research where they're exploring lucid dreaming as a for its healing techniques. In fact, when I interviewed Robert Wagner, I remember who edits this lucid dreaming journal. He told me that the majority of letters that he gets from people is about how lucid dreaming is being used. They're using it to heal themselves. Sometimes of just like physical ailments. Like there was one case of somebody who had some, very serious infection in their throat, and during a lucid dream, they went and looked in the mirror and imagined this, blue or golden light in that area, and then, woke up and their infection was almost healed. There's many cases of people reporting, physical ailments as well as, like for my own case, emotional traumas and different things. So lucid dreaming has a long history, like shamanic healing does, of being able to help people overcome physical ailments and emotional traumas.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning all that. And I love the image of the person, healing and sending that light energy into their throat.
Yeah.
That's so encouraging to hear that as beings we have that potential within us.
Yeah, yeah, I use it also to heal myself from chronic headaches as well. So yeah, definitely. I would say heal, but it helped quite a bit by having that visualization within the lucid dream.
Yeah, actually, so I have a story of a dream that I had. It just popped up into my mind of this sort of thing. I deal with, I have HPV, and so I got the warts from them. I lived in a few different spiritual retreat centers around the
Hmm.
United States, and I was working in the kitchen at this time, and I was dealing with, of course, all the like emotional responses from having that sort of thing, and then the reaction from the retreat center people was like shock and like they were like scared. And anyways, I'd never had something or dealt with something like that before, but I wanted to them to be gone. Obviously, I hated the idea of like spreading them or having some, anyways. I'd had a lucid dream and I was asking for them to be healed. I was saying like I'm going to heal myself. Like I feel this releasing and resolving itself. And the next morning I woke up and I literally had the wart on my finger and it just like peeled off. Yeah, I guess I want to thank you for talking about this because I've never shared that before, right? Or much of those sorts of experiences. I've had a few of them, but they're stigmatized a little bit. And I didn't want to be perceived as like making anything up or like, anyways. So I
Yeah.
wonder, I'm happy about you sharing that. And I'm wonder, like, did you deal with some difficulties in talking about this kind of thing? Taboo topics?
I get asked that a lot about the different taboo topics that I discuss, and I've never really had much trouble talking about things that most other people find difficult or taboo. I discuss sex a lot and sexual trauma, healing from sexual trauma in my book. No, my whole life, I think I've always been able to do that. I'm really happy to hear about your healing experience. There's definitely a very strong connection between, the mind and the body that has really been ignored a lot in medicine. It's really more understood now, today than when I was in school. But when I was in school, people really thought that it was like snake oil to, think that you can heal yourself with your mind. And I think that one of my mentors when I was in college told me that the greatest, most undiscussed treatment or technique in medicine, has been kind of pushed aside and ignored, and that's what they call the placebo effect. The placebo effect, which is, in medicine, is when your mind actually has a positive or negative effect on the healing of your body by what you're thinking or, your belief system is at the time. And, in most medical research, they sort of they sort of treat it as this, problem. Oh, it's just the placebo effect that gets in the way of their research, as if they're not understanding that the power of the mind is amazing in being able to heal. And that's what I think is so amazing about both lucid dreaming and psychedelics is I think they amplify the placebo effect. They amplify what we call, the power of the mind to heal the body. And it works both ways. If you think that if you worry about things too much or you're anxious, I mean, you can also harm your body. But if you think about healing, or if you believe that you're healing, then your body often follows suit with what your mind is believing.
Hmm. The mind is so powerful. And placebo effect of what the mind is able to create. I love that you said scientists have typically viewed the placebo as something that's kind of like you know, something you have to have in order for the experiment to work versus
Yeah,
something, what if you can choose what you want your placebo to be?
yeah.
Yeah. So I wonder if you can get into a little bit about lucid dreaming and the dream characters. You mentioned in your book, Dreaming Wide Awake, that sometimes characters can seem autonomous and like, they're definitely outside of our control. And I hear some lucid dreamers and coaches that will say, like, you can get into a dream and just control everything right away. You can have full, total control. It's one of the biggest, like, misconceptions and myths that I hear a lot of people, and Ryan Hurd on my show a few weeks ago said that it deals with the Western desire to just dominate and control, and that's why we in the West like think of that in lucid dreaming as well, because control, like hungry, people want control over everything. But dream
Yeah,
characters, they're wild.
yeah. Yeah, they sure are. In fact, that's, when I first started lucid dreaming, my first inclination was to do all the playground kind of stuff, flying and sex and going through walls and all that kind of stuff, right? And then it sort of became obvious to me that, that it was way more interesting just to have conversations with the dream characters, and discuss, philosophical ideas with them. And, it was, this to me became the probably the central thing that I, love doing to this day with dream characters is having conversations with them or having conversations with the intelligence behind the dream itself. There's like a dreaming mind that you can talk to that's even more interesting. But the dream characters, I would say, fall into a couple of different categories. There are some that seem very simple-minded, that don't really seem to have much personality, and they just almost seem like puppets in a way. And then there's dream characters that clearly have much more complex personalities and seem as complex as talking to you right now. And you can have these really amazing discussions with them. And then there are dream characters that are, I guess, what I would call, the wise beings or the teachers or the guardians that, seem to know you more than you know yourself and seem to be able to, to you. And they often come to me in the form of small children when I'm in my dreams. And then there's another category of dream characters where that seem like they're actually other dreamers, other people, other physical human beings that you're meeting in the dream realm. And I've had experiences where I've had like shared dreaming experiences with them, and have tried to set up different experiments to try to verify that. And then I thought those were all the basic categories until fairly recently. I discovered there was yet another category, which was these dream characters that seem to be able to, you talked about being able to control everything. Well, I've met dream characters that I definitely cannot control, and that were out to control me, and sort of dragged me into a situation or forced me to do something, and while I was having a lucid dream. And I thought this was something that was impossible. I never thought that it was possible to control the entire dream. I thought, you can influence it in different ways and you can navigate through the dream and interact with it, but never thought you can control it. But I never thought that another character can control me. And this I discovered is definitely possible. And I spoke to other lucid dreamers, and they told me they've also experienced that on occasion. So those are the different characters that I've discovered, and whether they have an autonomous, independent existence, independent of me and my mind, is kind of like the $1 million question. It's what I've also explored in my latest book about, which isn't about lucid dreaming. It's about the entities that people encounter on their DMT experience, and whether they have an independent existence or not. And it's very, very similar. Are these just projections of our own mind, or are they independent entities? And maybe that's not really the right question to ask. Maybe what they are is maybe they're part of our mind, but maybe our mind extends beyond our brain. In other words, maybe the whole universe is really a huge mind in some sense. So anyway, these are things that I've given a great deal of thought to, and I don't have firm answers for you about them, but that's some of my thoughts in this area.
Well, maybe it's a good thing if by the end of this episode we leave ourselves, me and you included, with a lot more questions than answers, because that's, I mean, the
Yeah,
nature of science, right? Each answer you get leads to like 10,000 more questions. So
yeah,
one of those questions I have right now is, as you're talking about all this, I find myself comparing and thinking about how this all can relate to my waking life as well. I wonder if your experience with, let's focus with dream characters a little more here. I wonder if your experience with the different dream characters, and like you mentioned, thinking maybe they are autonomous, and if that's the case, we ought to have a whole lot more respect for them than typically. Even me starting out lucid dreaming, here's another story from my experience. I got into the dream realm and I said, this is a playground. This is my dream. These are all my characters, so I can do whatever I want. And consent is still important. Looking, I mean, my like
yeah,
animalistic urge, sexual desires just went like rampant. And I was like, well, that's okay. I had no feelings of guilt at all, or like nothing, doing anything wrong. But that the dream space, I think, and the characters you encounter, who knows, maybe there are other entities or dreamers you're connecting with in the shared, because you mentioned shared dreaming. I just saw your posts the other day with. I wonder if you could share a little bit about the shared dream, or well, you said it was a hypnagogic vision for you with Claire Johnson, dream researcher,
Ah,
and in the forest of the fairy.
yeah, yeah. Let me just. You also you triggered a lot of thoughts. Let me just respond to some of them before I share that with you. Which is that somebody years ago told me about they had a lucid dream and they were like it was so much fun just to beat people up in the lucid dream and I was enjoying it so much and I remember being absolutely horrified hearing that because I do have this this really strong understanding that there is not or this really strong suspicion that they are independent entities with feelings even if they are just parts of yourself. I think that they have consciousness. And the dream where I was describing earlier, where this entity overpowered me, it happened after I just started, just randomly kissing this girl in the dream without her consent. And it was like, no, 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 you have to get consent here too. It's not just like, you can just do whatever you want to other dream characters. So I think that consent is absolutely essential in that realm as much as it is in this realm. Also, before I wanted to, mention what happened with me and Claire Johnson the other day, is that I had been trying, I have had many, many shared dreams, shared non-lucid dreams with people where we, reported very similar context and very similar events that happened in the dreams with people who, I was emotionally bonded with or close with in different ways. And some of them seemed, remarkable and uncanny. And I had really, me and my ex-girlfriend had really wanted to see what it would be like to actually have a shared lucid dream. And we tried for about a year of doing this. We really tried, practicing. And it finally happened. It finally happened on one case. And that was just, that was remarkable. And that gave me, and that just, that convinced me that it is possible. So just a couple of days ago, me and Claire Johnson also did a podcast for one of her shows. And at the end of the podcast, we said, "Hey, let's try to meet up in a lucid dream tonight." And we shared a context. Let's meet in the woods. Let's meet with this blue skinned fairy, and let's try to try to have a shared lucid dream tonight. And we sort of parted on that note. And I my thought was I'm not really sure if I'm going to be able to have a lucid dream tonight. I can't just always have them on command. You know, and the chances of us, my girlfriend tried it for a year before we were able to do it. I'm not sure if we're able to, be able to have this shared experience. But remarkably, in that night, around 1 o'clock in the morning, I was in a highly altered state of consciousness at the time, and I thought, oh, I'm not lucid dreaming, but I should take advantage of this altered state of consciousness that I was in. And so I closed my eyes and I started visualizing myself in this forest and with the blue skinned fairy and with Claire and it became very very vivid and I found myself suddenly in this forest that it seemed three-dimensional. It seemed like I was really there with her, and we were the three of us, me, Claire, and the blue skinned fairy, were looking down into this pool of water and looking at our own reflection in the water. And this maybe lasted for, at least a good 5 or 10 minutes. And then I came out of the trance and I was like, okay, well, I got to tell Claire about this. So I went to my email program to send her a message. And just as I was about to type in the message, beep, I get this email comes up, right? And it's from Claire. And Claire says, you're not going to believe this, but I just had this experience where, I was lucid dreaming and I went to the forest to try to find you, and you were there, and you, me, and the blue skin fairy. We were just like this really joyous feeling, and I was just like, like my mouth was just like hanging open in awe because it was just first of all remarkable the timing of it. It was such a powerful synchronicity that it happened at exactly the same time, and that we both experienced this really joyous feeling in the lucid dream. So even though it wasn't a shared lucid dream, it was like I'd been discussing it throughout this podcast with you. I think there's a connection between not just lucid dreaming, but with mystical or psychedelic or altered states of consciousness. And I think that you can experience shared telepathic types of realities when you link up with people that you have connections with.
Yes, yes, definitely. 100%. And the similarities that are popping to mind now between lucid dreaming and psychedelics, I have to mention here because it really powerful memories that I have from both experiences. I did a Santa Daime ritual, which is ayahuasca, but with the Christian tradition. And I
Yeah.
grew up in the Christian church, and I was like, "What? They take ayahuasca like we take communion? Wow, this is crazy." Um, but actually, it was really honored and held in a meditative space, and we just did like joyous chanting, like dun 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 dun. It was, I mean, it was just like, and we were told to sit up during it, which is different. It's really strange. I thought it was strange because when I thought of ayahuasca, I think in the Amazon and lying down, blindfolded, with shaman drumming around you. But this experience, we were told to stay meditating and so sit up, and that was the hardest, so hard, like to
Yeah.
sit up during that experience. But there's something about it was just special. And anyways, the dreams I've had, there are several dreams where the dream just kind of dissolves, or say one of them I got shot. Many, many times there was a group of soldiers with AK-47s that shot me as I walked out of a cave, but I was lucid. And okay, normally this is a dream where I'm terrified and I'm in a great deal of pain and like this is an awful dream, like crazy. I want to wake up from it. But when I was lucid, my mind was strong enough to repeat the mantra that like this is not real. The pain that I experience is illusory. Nothing all that bad is going to happen. So I was able to surrender to it in that moment. There's a connection here to psychedelics because what happened, I was aware still. I was in this space of having the dream body dissolve, completely ripped up by bullets, but yet still being there, even though there's no imagery whatsoever anymore. But this bright, blinding light, very much similar to, I have no other reference point to that nothingness, that complete ego body dissolution as ayahuasca and DMT.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I took part in a Native American church peyote ceremony years ago, and and that to me, what you're describing was the most difficult part of the ceremony. It lasted 12 hours, and every time I started slouching, back or just kind of wanting to sort of lie down, the shaman who was controlling the thing kept telling me to sit up. Sit up, keep your back straight, sit up. And I felt like I was in grade school, having to sit up, with my back straight the whole time. But I did have amazing experiences during the in the ceremony. It was really one of the most incredible psychedelic experiences of my life. Yeah, I was going to say something else about that, but I think I forgot what else we were.
So you
What,
were told to
what,
sit up too as well, and
yeah, yeah,
that's very common, I guess. I didn't know other traditions did that as well.
yeah. It was a Native American church ceremony that I did in Northern California years ago. Oh, I know what I was going to tell you was about your experience that you had with the AK-47. You know, when there was a period where I was having a lot of lucid dreams, and I was just, I was trying to experiment with everything that I could. What can I do in a lucid dream? And I had had this giant list of things that I was trying throughout the lucid dream experiences, and I one day got this idea. I wanted to know what it was like to explore, the after death realm in a lucid dream. Could I have a near death experience in a lucid dream? So, in my next lucid dream, I remembered this, and I thought to myself, I'm just gonna take a gun and put it to my head and shoot myself in the dream just because I wanted to see what would happen. I know that I'm just dreaming, and so in the dream, I took more precautions than I'd ever taken in a lucid dream. I took one reality test after another to make sure that I was absolutely in a lucid dream. And after I had this confirmed over and over again, it still took a fair amount of bravery to actually do it. And I took a gun and put it to my head and blasted my head open. And what happened was really surprising. What happened right afterwards was just a black, silent void. There was just nothing. I didn't experience the light that you're describing. It was just a black, silent void. And I was, this really wasn't what I was expecting, but this is what my mind conjured up. And I thought about that experience for quite a while. And I think maybe around 6 months after I had that experience, I was reading a book about near death experiences. And in the book, it was talking about how, over 90% of the people that have a near-death experience, it's really a beautiful experience. It's very blissful. It's very ecstatic. You're going down this tunnel into this, white light, this golden light that's brighter than anything but doesn't hurt your eyes, and it's just like peace and love and surrender, and and you meet up with departed loved ones, and it's this really joyous reunion, and all these things. And then it said, with the exception of people who attempt suicide, that many people who attempt suicide tend to have negative near-death experiences, and one of the most common is they find themselves in this dark silent void. And I was like, I got this chill up my spine when I read that, because I was like, maybe what I was experiencing in the lucid dream wasn't so much insight into what happens after death, but what happens after suicide, because that was what I had done in the dream. So I thought that was a really interesting, interesting.
Hmm. That just reminded me so strongly of the Bardo of Dharmata and the teachings in Tibetan dream yoga Buddhism about how one ought to approach death. With what energy do you bring to death? Is it surrender, openness? As me, I was feeling during that experience outside of the cave, just complete letting go. Or is it it's pretty violent and violent against oneself, which is like we mentioned earlier, how we ought to treat the dream characters with respect, especially even oneself. Like you mentioned, blowing your own head open, and it just like was like whoa.
Yeah,
Um, there's an energy behind that, right? And
yeah,
it kind of transfers. I guess we can maybe expect that death will be a continuum of, or will go somewhere according to what we were experiencing or thinking in our minds and bodies, hearts at the moment of death.
yeah.
But do you have any musings about what happens then?
About what happens after you die.
Yeah,
I've done, hundreds of interviews in my life. 7 of my books, are interview collections. And that's one of the questions that I've asked everybody that I've interviewed just about is, what do you think happens to consciousness after death? I'm surprised, that more people don't ask this question in interviews. And that was, part of my original inspiration behind doing the interviews when my partner and I started out with Mavericks of the Mind years ago, was to ask philosophical questions like the meaning of life, and what do you think happens to consciousness after death? And I think that that's probably the most interesting question that we could ask. I don't think anything stimulates the imagination more than what happens after we die, and I don't think anybody knows the answer to that profound philosophical question. But I think that thinking about it is a tremendous exercise of the imagination. And I don't think anything is really more philosophically more important. I think about it all the time. I think it's a scary question for people to ask, and maybe that's why it's not asked more. But I don't find it scary. I find it philosophically intriguing, and I really wonder, what do I personally think happens? Well, I've I've gone back and forth. I don't have a firm belief about what I think happens. I suspect that your consciousness does continue. I'm not 100% convinced of that, to be honest. I have a very strong background in neuroscience, and I understand the role that the brain plays in consciousness. I don't know if it's creating or generating consciousness in some way, or whether it's interacting with the field of consciousness to produce some kind of individual state, and whether that individual state continues after death. I'm not sure. I used to have these, philosophical discussions with my friend Nina Gruboy, one of the people I interviewed in Mavericks of the Mind, and we used to discuss this all the time. And I would say, I think when you die, it's like you're like a drop of water that diffuses back into the ocean, and you just become the ocean again. And she would say, yeah, there is that. But there's also all these layers of individuality, that also can reincarnate and come back. And and we used to sort of go back and forth with ideas on this for a long time. And and she used to refer to her body as a spacesuit. She said, my body's just a spacesuit. and it'll become threadbare. And, when it's gone, I'll leave and I'll come back and I'll have another spacesuit. So the addendum to this story is that, after she died, I was one day in Colorado sitting in a friend's living room. They had gone to sleep. The TV was kind of playing in the background, and I was smoking some cannabis and writing in my journal. And I started thinking about Nina Greboy, and started thinking about, the process of what was going on in her mind as she was dying. And I'm thinking to myself, I'll bet you when Nina was dying, she was probably thinking, oh, yeah, I see. David J. Brown was right. You just, do merge into the one consciousness. You do just become part of God. You do just become like a drop of water in the ocean, right? And as I'm kind of thinking this to myself in this kind of egotistical way, right? I look up on the TV screen, and there is just one word on the TV screen, and that word was spacesuit, right? The word that Nina had always told me was the word she used for her body, and it was just like too remarkable to just be just a coincidence. It was, one of the most profound experiences I had with somebody communicating with me after they died. So that sort of really hit home and led me to, to highly value the idea that our consciousness does continue. And I guess, what do I believe happens? I think that just like life, what we believe influences, what happens in life. Our belief plays such an important role. We were talking about the placebo effect earlier. And I think that the same is true in death. I think that what you believe happens about death, or, believe in the death process, influences what happens. So I think, Christians experience Jesus, and and Buddhists experience, going into Buddha consciousness, and atheists experience going into black nothingness. And so I think that, that there's a role that, that belief plays, not just throughout life, but that continues on into the death process. But I'm not 100% convinced of that. I'm sure I'll be surprised when it actually happens.
If only we could talk with somebody who'd went through that transition.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of an audiobook I was listening to called Journey of Souls or something like that. And it was about a hypnotist who had transgressed, how people hypnotists will take people through their past lives, and that's something very
Mhm.
common. But this one took people back through their intermediate lives, their lives as spirits, souls, being in the dream world, being in the astral, whatever you want to call it, but being in this non-physical but still reality type like space where the rules of physical world don't apply. So you can walk through a door and it's a portal. You can dive backwards and enter the lucid light, as Claire Johnson calls it. And many lucid dream experiencers have that experience too. So another thing I wanted to mention, you reminded me of an experience that the dogs are barking in there. I wonder if anyone can hear that. You reminded me of an experience I had with my experience of what DMT and the dream experiences I had with that related to the DMT experience was like, but then my other buddy who had taken it as well, and his experience was like fiery inferno, like hell, like
Yeah.
feeling and experience. And I was like, what? I thought you just dissolved into like the bliss and light. Why does the same thing do that to you? And that to me was like evident of how our belief and how our energy we bring into an experience affects it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. It plays a very important role. I should mention that DMT is naturally found in the human body. It's not just a drug really. It's naturally found in the human body in almost all animals and almost every species of plants. In fact, it's so common throughout nature that it's in every glass of orange juice that you drink. There's trace amounts of DMT. So and nobody knows what function it serves in any of these places. One of the theories is that the brain produces DMT when we're dreaming, and that and that it's somehow related to the dreaming process, and that it's a natural it's a natural neurotransmitter that helps to stimulate dreaming. Other people associate it with the near death experience. There's a lot of similarities the DMT experience. And also, I should mention there's two different types of DMT. There's NN-DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, and they both have sort of opposite type experiences. NN-DMT, people often find themselves, in this complex hyperspace where they meet all kinds of entities, angels, demons, aliens, fairies. There's self-transforming machine elves. There's this whole repertoire of entities that people report contact with. And in fact, that's the subject of my latest book, is to try to catalog these different entities. The illustrated field guide to DMT entities. Me and an artist and other artists try to describe them and categorize them and illustrate them. But then there's another type of DMT, 5-MeO-DMT, which does just the opposite. People who have that experience just usually find themselves in just like a white light of non-duality, of nothingness, where they sort of identify with the source. So it's interesting that they have these sort of opposite effects. And we do know that that laboratory animals, rats and rodents, that they have DMT in their brains, and that the DMT levels dramatically escalate when they experience cardiac arrest. In other words, when they're dying. So this could be further evidence that that it's related to the near-death experience in human beings.
It's so cool to hear so many different angles on these different kinds of altered states of consciousness that all have these deep similarities.
Uh,
I wonder if we can touch a little more on how lucid dreaming can be a healing tool in the way that they're describing psychedelics being helpful now for PTSD and depression and anxiety. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you believe or have studied about how lucid dreaming can also be applicable towards helping and managing and dealing with nightmares, PTSD, and yeah.
Yeah, well, that's one of the main reasons that lucid dreaming is applied in psychotherapy, is as a tool for overcoming the terror that people experience during nightmares. In fact, many people have their first spontaneous lucid dreams when they have nightmares. They'll wake up inside the dream and realize that it's just a dream while it's happening, and this gives them a chance to help reconcile, with a threatening dream character that's chasing them or something, to confront the dream character and ask them, "Why are you chasing me?" And the dream character might come up with something. Well, it's because when you were a child, dot dot dot, or something like that, and they can get some kind of insight that helps to resolve the experience, the trauma that's causing this repeated nightmare. Stephen LaBerge, I remember, the Stanford-based lucid dream researcher, who was really the first person to teach me about the techniques for lucid dreaming. He recommended that when people have a nightmare situation going on in a lucid dream, to not only confront the lucid dream character, but to hug it, and that by hugging the threatening figure, people often felt that they were unifying with it, that they were forming a kind of unified consciousness with them, that it was a part of themselves that they had separated from for some reason, maybe due to some kind of childhood trauma. And so that's it can be a very powerful tool for helping people to overcome nightmares. It can also be, like I mentioned earlier, for overcoming physical ailments. For like I said, person who had the infection in their throat, and in my own case with chronic headaches, in the lucid dream, if you visualize a light around that area, that you can help to bring about real healing. Or in my own case, what I did was I actually called upon my physician, who had passed away about a year earlier, who to me was a great healer, and I called upon him in the lucid dream, and he placed his hands on my head in the lucid dream, and was able to infuse his healing psychic energies into me, and it did have a very beneficial effect on healing my headaches at the time, and also with not just physical ailments, with emotional traumas. As I discussed in my book, I experienced sexual trauma when I was a very young child, and I, was really trying really hard to remember what it was that I know. I knew this happened, but I couldn't remember, the specific details of it. And in one of my lucid dreams, when I was writing my book, I asked to be shown details from that, and I was, so that there are parts of you that remember, these details that you may not be able to access, and that the lucid dream can not only help you to access, but then help you to integrate, and then.
I've been having a few visions and dreams come to mind as you're talking about this, and just wanted to briefly say how honored I've been to have you here and to talk about these topics. It really does feel like a dream. So the dream that is coming to mind now, there's a few, but I'll start with the first. I was lucid, and it was a nightmare. It started out as a nightmare, like a real bad nightmare. I was a younger version of myself, with a girl, also younger version, like little child, young self. And we were being chased by these like shadow monster creature things, and they were like nipping at our heels. They were coming from the ground, like from the basement almost, and nipping at our heels. We were running away. It's terrifying. But suddenly I become lucid, and I see a picture of Jesus on the floor in this house. I pick it up and I start saying, well, the power of Christ flows through me, and I'm sending you this love, energy, that sort of thing. Bringing that energy in and giving it to those like shadow things. And the love just dissolved, and it dissolved the shadows, and I found myself up in the schoolyard, and it's beautiful, just like pink, orange, like all the colors in the sky. And I just run and jump and start sailing, floating freely through the sky. This is how that dream ended. Like there was no lapse between I didn't wake up and then have a different dream. It just merged and shifted into that. It was quite interesting, amazing, like the most
Yeah.
night and day shift that I've ever had in the dream experience.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, that's beautiful to hear. We have a whole section in our book, The Illustrated Field Guide to DMT Entities, on Jesus, because many people encounter Jesus as an entity when they go into DMT hyperspace. Jesus or the Virgin Mary or different deities from different world religions. But that's a beautiful, beautiful story. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks for listening. So I have one final question. I'm not sure what it is yet. There's so many, like I said, I think somewhere in this podcast that each topic we go into brings up about 100 more questions. So we could go on for another hour or so, but I do have to get going, and my computer's about to die. So yeah, we'll have to call it a close here soon. But my other question, last question is, so we drew so many parallels to lucid dreaming, shamanic, DMT, psychedelics, visionary, mystical experiences, and these all having inherent similarities. I wonder if you could talk about just one last kind of sum up about like what is all of this? No, it's
What is
super
all of
broad.
this? Well, gosh, let me think about that for a second. I mean, I think that people, that everyone has access to higher states of consciousness that we're kind of limited in our normal everyday waking reality. Most people don't realize that they have these access to mystical states of consciousness, to higher aesthetic states of consciousness, to telepathic states, to psychic states of communication with other people, that we have access to not only our own unconscious minds, but to a collective unconscious, to the DNA, archives in our body, and to the wisdom of all life forms that have ever existed. And then on even deeper levels, we have access to these to spiritual realities and to cosmic realities, and to not only all life, but the whole cosmos, the whole universe. I think is available to us, that we can tap into. And most people walk around in these kind of robotic, sleepwalking trances without knowledge that they even have this all within them. And all it takes is just one little biochemical shift, or one little experience in their lives, to traumatize them or to startle them, and suddenly these other states of consciousness are right there, in their full blooming potential. I mean, I began doing this when I was around. I mean, I was always interested in dreams when I was a child, but when I was a young teenager, I started meditating. I started practicing transcendental meditation, and just through meditation, you can access, the beginnings of many of these different states of consciousness. So, so I think that there's something that's available to all of us. I can also say another note that I think part of the reason, we're experiencing such an interest in psychedelics right now, magic mushrooms and ayahuasca, and other plant medicines like that is because we're in an ecological crisis. And I think that the biosphere, the whole, Mother Nature matrix on this planet has a kind of intelligence or a kind of wisdom, and it operates like the human body does. It's a bodily system. And just like your own body sends out, antibodies when you get an infection, or it sends out, different hormones to help, combat, a type of illness. I think that that Mother Nature, that the biosphere sends out plant medicines, psychedelic medicines, ayahuasca and magic mushrooms and iboga, as a way of helping to accelerate ecological consciousness. Common themes that people bring back from a psychedelic experience is that all is one. The boundaries blur between them and the external world. And how important this is, when we're going through, global warming and this, this crisis due to the way that we're polluting the planet, and people come back with this feeling of, wow, when I pollute the planet, I'm really polluting myself. That there's really no distinguishment between the, my body and the physical body. It's all one interconnected system. So I think that that's, it's really no accident that this is happening right now, and I think that that's really the main reason why consciousness is evolving into higher states of awareness, and why I think it's not only fun and philosophically intriguing to explore these states, but it's actually vital for our own survival as a species.
Wow, there's so many nuggets of wisdom there. It's hard for me to pick one and rephrase. But what you said about our just the way that the I'm sorry, I'm like losing my words right now. So much awesome stuff that we've talked about, and so many more questions I have, but we've run out of time. So I want to know about your other books. Like, what can you just list a few names of titles that people who maybe this conversation sparked some curiosity or interest into delving deeper into these
Yeah.
topics, is what
Well,
we would be
this is
discussing.
this is this is my latest book, The Illustrated Field Guide to DMT Entities, which I was describing earlier. This is Dreaming Wide Awake. This is my book on lucid dreaming and psychedelics. Another recent book that I just had published was called Psychedelics and the Coming Singularity, which is about the relationship between artificial intelligence and psychedelics, and simulation theory. Only just published was the third edition of my book, Mavericks of the Mind, which was my first collection of interviews. In that book, I interviewed people like Terence McKenna and Timothy Leary, John Lilly, Robert Anton Wilson, Ralph Abraham, Laura Huxley, Carolyn Mary Kleefeld, and others. And that was just released in its third expanded edition. And I have other collections of interviews, Women in Visionary Art, which is a collection of interviews that I did with my ex-girlfriend, and 16 different women visionary artists with wonderful examples showcasing their amazing work. I've done also Mavericks of Medicine, which is a collection of interviews about the medical frontiers that are lying on the horizon. And all my books really, they all deal with the evolution of consciousness in different ways, and trying to find a bridge between science and spirituality. Art, science, and spirituality are really the themes of really all my books. So thank you for this opportunity to talk about my books, and for your wonderful, really great questions. I really enjoy talking. We should do it again sometime.
I'd really love that. Yeah, thank you, David. So I want to just quote your friend who talked about the spacesuits and say, please don't forget that we have access to this amazing, endless world if we remember that we can take off our spacesuits.
Indeed, indeed, absolutely.
All right. Goodbye.
Goodbye. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you, Jason.